the Family Pictures podcast. This is Michael Branson Smith, and I'm with Jim Groom.
Howdy.
We'll be taking requests all night, you teenage Comet zombies. We are on the hit line 448-5463 with Night of the Comet. Yes, this is a family picture. Somehow, the legal drinking age is now 10. But you still need ID. So be prepared, my folks, as you walk out into the red dusted landscape in front of you as we try to figure out this film written and directed by Tom Eberhardt, starring Catherine Mary Stewart, Kelly Maroney, and Robert Beltran, with an array of kind of cult film stars with them. This is the cult zombie classic in which two sisters are left at the end of the world after a Halley's Comet-styled event causes the entire Earth to be turned into little piles of red dust. Does that sound about right, Jim?
Yes, absolutely. It's a very good description of what this movie is.
And if you have not been turned into a pile of red dust and had only a slight exposure to this comet, you are zombified as your blood slowly dries up and eventually you become a zombie. But why is this a family picture, Jim Groom?
Well, I mean, it has a lot of elements of, what a good family picture has. Sibling rivalry, struggles, especially 80s family movies, struggles with step parents, right? And also, the kind of inclination to start one's own family, right? To kind of relive the cycle and kind of, go through that adolescence and then kind of, maybe start your own family, particularly at the end of the world. It's very important that people start their own families. So it is very much a family movie, as much as it might also be a very campy B movie.
Yeah, it's an incredible B movie. And, we should start with stepmom Doris and the siblings. So Reggie and Sam, played by, Reggie is the older sister, played by Catherine Mary Stewart, and Sam is the younger sister, Kelly Maroney. In its classic 80s, you have like 20-somethings that are playing 18 and 16-year-olds. So they don't look like teenagers
In
whatsoever.
cheerleader suits.
Yeah, I know. And we also have Doris, who's the stepmom, and she's immediately this avatar of a bad family relationship, right? So the film basically starts with the two sisters in different spaces. Reggie's like stuck on her. She's works at a movie theater, and she's playing Tempest, which I have to give you. You take the floor. What's Tempest to you, Jim Groom?
So Tempest is an Atari Vector video game. Probably came out 82 or 83 when the movie came out. And this is played on a mini cabinet, so not even a full cabinet. And it's just really, and it plays a very important part in the film, actually. But it's just so beautiful to see those 1980s video games, which was the golden age of classic arcade games. They were deep in it, in that movie theater lobby. And Reggie just playing, and her boss being like, go walk the house. And she's not doing any work. She's just playing video games. It's
right.
awesome.
And she's being like a teenage girl. And at the same time, her sister's stuck at home with stepmom Doris, and the whole world is basically partying, right? Like it's a big party. The comet is coming. Everybody's excited. And it's something that we obviously is taken into the future of like Independence Day, right? Where
Absolutely.
The aliens are coming. People have their homemade signs standing up on top of their roofs. I love you, aliens, or I love you, Comet. It's going to be so great, right? But Sam is not interested because she kind of is like, her stepmom is a real drag, right? Sam's the cheerleader. She's the social one, but she's younger, so she's stuck at home. She doesn't have a job. And Reggie, she's got a thing for the film projectionist and is hoping to spend the night with him. And
Larry,
who also is from one of my favorite films. He's from with Nick Cage,
Valley Girl.
Valley Girl, right? And
He's
he's
been in
like,
a ton of stuff though.
yeah, yeah, he's
He
great.
was in Breaking Bad.
Oh, right, right, right. He's one of the white supremacists,
He's
right?
one of the exactly, and he's one of the cops in Jackie Brown.
Right, 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 right.
I
Yeah,
just I went down a big rabbit hole with that guy. I was like, what? Anyway, that was
yeah.
great.
And who's wait? We should say who's played by Michael Bowen.
Michael Bowen. That's right.
Yeah, and so immediately we get some tension between the sisters here, right? So Reggie calls up Sam and says like, "Hey, tell Doris I'm not coming home." And she's like, "You tell her." "No, you tell her." It's like, "Come on, help me out." And she's just not interested in helping each other. I mean, it's hard to say. It's like, is it they're just typical teenagers and they're just really in different places and not that interested in one another ultimately? I think it's probably more that. But this leads to basically, Doris is real bitchy to Reggie and says, "You come home." And Reggie's like, "I ain't coming home. I'm 18."
Yeah,
And then
exactly.
Sam kind of gives her some lip about, how Doris appears to be, hanging on Chuck, the neighbor across the street, right? And wait till I tell Daddy. And so Doris like slaps Sam, Sam slaps Doris, and then Doris literally decks Sam, like punches her out.
Levels her. And that was like seeing this in the 80s, and we'll talk a little bit about that. That was a scene where it was like, what? Like,
Yeah,
what? She just punched her out?
right. And so, but this is providing us also like this is clearly a family of dysfunction, which is an archetype of the 80s, right? We
Mhm.
have, you know, single parents, a lot of divorce, which is a relic of the, 70s. So many, who didn't have friends that had parents that were divorced. Like it was like an anomaly, especially if you were from the city. My wife would describe like, I didn't know anybody whose parents were still married. So maybe in the suburbs, you'd more likely have parents that are still together. But but
The good Catholics can often hold it together, but everyone else was.
yeah, yeah. Um, but we're also given a clue about their dad.
Oh yeah, it's the best. Yeah.
Sorry, and we get a sense that dad is in the military still. He's been a military guy since Vietnam, and they reference how he's out fighting the Sandinistas, which is really interesting. Which means he's in Nicaragua, means he's part of another famous '80s moment, the Iran Contra affair, where he's basically illegally fighting against a group of communist affiliated rebels that have been paid for, where Oliver North has technically funneled money through arms sales to none other than Iran.
Yeah, that's the weirdest. The Iran Contra schedule. It's like, what exactly is going on here? Like
Yeah,
Oliver
yeah,
North, like they put the dumbest of dumb up to kind of like take the fall. What a crazy thing. But another piece about this is you already mentioned Valley Girl, right? So Valley Girl is the producers of this film had a huge success with Valley Girl. Martha Coolidge directs it. It's a great film. It has great reviews on a very small budget. They make a lot of money. Great film in 83. So in 84, they're like, wait, we're going to do the same thing again. Although the producers didn't like the script or the director, but they figured something out, and this film did very well like that. But the Sandinistas piece is interesting because it's almost like a reference to another like very present film in this film. So Valley Girl is very present. There's movie posters on and in the foyer. There's she has the album when she's in the radio station and kind of throws it aside. But then there's Repo Man, and
right,
Repo Man, and the whole idea is, son, we sent all your college money to, to buy Bibles in Nicaragua, right? Like, and so there's
right,
that whole like kind of
yeah,
alternative, independent, like movies that are kind of appealing to that counterculture, whether it's
right.
punk or what have you, Valley Girl, etc. And so this fits right in there with those.
Yeah, punk culture does come up, and we're going to get there. But because it is a big part of the kind of classic zombie anti-consumerist kind of attitude that the film ultimately has.
Yeah.
But back to, Daddy being down in Banana Land, as Doris describes, you know,
That's
this is it's a very important part of the relationship between the sisters because they've clearly been raised to be little army brats, right? There's many references to their ability to take care of themselves. Like when Reggie first confronts a zombie that has killed Larry and later is eating him, which she just realizes later on. She's like telling the zombie, like, "Yo, dude, I can take care of myself, right? I've been trained, right?" And then they're just like casually firing off Mac 10 submachine guns, right? Which is my favorite scene by far,
yeah.
when they're just spraying that 1974 Cadillac Coupe de Ville, and Sam's like pissed off because it keeps jamming, and she's like, "Daddy would have gotten us Uzis,
Yeah,
right?"
it's the
Meanwhile,
best.
where the fuck did the Mac 10s come from,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. But I also love, I mean, I really like, uh, and I think it's one of the reasons this film did so well. Maybe not only in the theaters because it did do well; it was a success, but it has taken on a cult following and has
Right.
become like I listened to the Blu-ray, which had all these different commentaries. Like it's a thing. And one of the things that I think it became a thing for is that these two sisters are kind of badass. And like
Totally badass.
they are like ass kickers of
Yeah.
zombies and others. And
Yeah.
I think that's a really nice element of this film that you don't see often in the 80s.
Right. No, they don't take shit either. That's what's so great about them. Like, not from one another, and that's a big point of tension, but they also are just like, they're ready to rumble, right? Like
Mhm.
which we'll talk about in the context of the mall scene later on.
Sure.
And so, at some point, we get to learn a little bit more about her family when she opens up to Hector. Hector's the man who shows up, and he's another character we get to talk about in his family. And she describes like her mom split after her dad came home from Vietnam. She just wasn't into him being a military wife. You get a sense, and she says, "Yeah, it was mostly me, Reggie, Dad, and Third Special Forces." So that classic trope, the idea, not even a trope, like the idea of a military family and what that's like, and how disconnected it is. And she talks about it's like, well, Dad found us a new mom and went off looking for war despite, and this is because despite all his efforts, he realized his daughters weren't going to become Rangers. Like they were
Yeah.
just teenage girls still, right? And so their relationship is kind of, as you described, the core of the movie, right? And how they at first show no interest, but what does Reggie do as soon as like she starts to realize things are wrong? Like Larry, she's had to deal with the zombie that's killed Larry. She takes off on the motorcycle, and where's she headed off to?
She's going back home, right, to the ET kind of inspired suburb, seemingly on the kind of edge of town or edge of LA to look for her sister. And that's where you kind of start to put the pieces together of what happened. Everyone who was partying the night before is brick dust or just red dust in the
Red
streets
Dust.
that I
Yeah.
learned that they made from brick dust, which was pretty cool. And
Oh,
the
that's cool.
I
Okay.
love it that all the kind of clothes and everything are just hanging out
Yeah.
there, and even the dog
The
leash.
dog, Buffy the
It's
dog.
the best. So and she
Here's
goes back,
Doris. Here's Chuck.
and Chuck has cousin Eddie's shoes.
Oh, you're right. The white loafers, man. The
Exactly.
suede,
It's a
the
little
patent leather white loafers.
intertextuality between this and episode one.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, it's so, and she goes looking for her sister, and she's nervous because she's starting to put the pieces together that something dramatic happened overnight. She's not sure why she has survived it. So she goes back to their kind of suburban home to figure out what.
And their home is, it's trying to be that typical
Yeah.
California suburban home and the trappings of the 80s. Sam's like walking around with the boombox. She's eating Raisin Bran. And like she doesn't realize anything's wrong. But at the same time, you can tell this home is pretty, it's like this white walled, very vanilla home. It's not particular cozy,
No.
homey home. And so that's also, you can get a sense like this family is kind of broken in a certain way.
Yeah, it is, and it's really the two sisters. They have each other. And as an aside, um, on Sam's wall is a picture of Matt Dillon from The Outsiders, which is episode 2 of
Uh-huh.
our Family Pictures podcast. We talk about that. In fact, we reference how he was a sex symbol for the young girls. And here's an example where it kind of plays out. But to your point, I think the striking relationship is just how acrimonious the relationship between Sam and her stepmother is, and just how much it's clear that it's over between
Right.
her and her father. And she's just passing time to make sure they're not hurt so she doesn't get the brunt of it from the dad who's over killing, who knows who. And that's it. Like they basically only have each other. They're alone.
Right. And but they're still typical girls. Like their relationship, is built around boys and shopping ultimately, right? And there's a situation when they go to the radio station, they hear on the radio someone talking, they're like, "Oh, a human being, let's go chase after that source." And they drive downtown and hit the radio station only to realize it's a pre-recorded show and it's a reel-to-reel tape that's on autoplay, and you're like, "Ooh, what's the mechanicals of that working? That would be
Yeah.
amazing to check out."
Yeah. Like that automation, kind of like Ray Bradbury, right? Like the
Yeah,
kind of, eternal spring where the house keeps on going and all the
right.
automation keeps on working. Like that's the one. It was a very nice, creepy element to this show.
Yeah,
And it came
yeah.
to this movie and it came up again and again.
And so this is where we meet Hector, and we'll get to that. But it's a very unsettling moment. I mean, Sam has this wonderful moment where she's like, "Wow, I could just take over and just be on the air," and she just starts like doing the her role line, and she's like, "Come on, I'm taking requests, all you teenage Comet zombies." And but she ends up, having a couple nightmares
Uh-huh.
and with some zombie cops that are trying to molest her, which is pretty gross. But
Yeah.
it's clear that Reggie isn't a sister that knows how to comfort her sister, too, right? Because, like, when she wakes up and she's screaming, and Reggie's like, "Ah, it's okay." Like, it's pretty quick that they're separated again, and she's talking to Hector, and they're on their own again, apart from one another. And they end up having it out, right? Because they meet this dashing Frank Poncherello style
Totally.
man
He
who's
is definitely Poncherello style.
right. He's like an Eric Estrada proxy. They're like, "Man, I wish we could get Eric Estrada for this role. He'd be great."
Now, and that guy was in Eating Raoul before this. And so
Yeah,
then he
yeah.
comes to
Robert
this.
Beltran.
Yep.
So yeah,
And he
so
goes on to
Robert,
be like on a Star Trek, like a later Star Trek version. So
right.
yeah, he has an interesting career.
So Robert Beltran, Hector, who I haven't mentioned, is actually at the radio station already, probably similarly trying to find signs of human life. Right. We don't know how he survived. The girl survived. We haven't described how people survive in this situation. Sam was lucky enough; she was like hiding out from Doris in the steel shed in the backyard, and Reggie was hiding out. She wasn't hiding out; she was making it.
She was
She was
making out.
she was making it. She was doing with Larry and the projection booth, which is also a steel box. So somehow steel, which Superman can see through, not lead, but steel, you
That's
can see
right.
through.
Come on, Larry.
Yeah, come on, Larry. Your references. Kind of projectionist pop culture type are you? And so they've survived, and Hector's this becomes this immediate avatar of their dysfunction over boys, and we learn about this later. What do we find out about them?
Dysfunction. Oh yeah, they're in competition. They're like,
Yeah,
this is the last guy.
right.
And so like you're gonna take this guy from me, older sister, like you've taken everybody from me, older sister. So obviously there's backstory there.
Right.
And and they're both, you know, Reggie has kind of been around, you get the sense, and she's can really handle herself well. And I think Sam, her younger sister, wants to be around or wants to have some of those experiences. And now she's faced with the fact that there's no one around but this one guy. and now her sister's going to take the one guy. And if I were Sam, I'd be pissed too.
Right. And so Sam is appropriately pissed, but the good thing is like you do sense that even if they are in competition and they aren't the closest, they immediately fall right back into whatever,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
exactly.
They start joking. And I think one of if there's like my favorite shot of the film is when they're hanging out on the cop car with the sirens going. And there's this thing that the
Yeah.
cinematographer does. They use these gradient filters to make the sky red, right?
Oh,
And then
beautiful.
as it drifts halfway through the frame towards the bottom, it becomes normal colored. So there's literally a red haze for like 3/4 of the entire film. There's
Yeah.
red lights everywhere. It's literally the red light district all over this place.
I
It's
mean,
the zombie red light district.
and it's worth mentioning, like this film was made for $700,000, which even in '84 was nothing.
Yeah,
And they had no budget, and it made 14 million. And the director and production designer, who I listened to a bit, were like, this was all kind of DIY, come up with stuff. Like
right.
there was no big money. They would not throw
No.
money at anything. It was like, okay, figure out what you can, which
Yeah,
I
and there's
love about this
right.
film.
And that's what I mean. Like, this is what we call like everything is all in camera opticals. This is not done in post. There's no special effects whatsoever. They're literally like, this is the shot we got because we're throwing this
Yeah,
red filter on top of the lens, right?
yeah,
And so, and that shot is like they're literally hanging out on top of a cop car, and they're talking about the end of the world. Two sisters just hanging out, having a soda, swinging, and the other, and Reggie swinging a baton, talking about the end of the world, and Sam just drifts into talking about boys she was going to meet and how that's not going to happen now. Poor Paul Taft never got a
that's right.
chance to ask out Sam.
And
And go ahead.
and this film does have those really like moments where you relate, right? Where she starts talking about the boy who she did have a crush on, who's
Right.
now obviously dust. And like there's this point where that's never going to happen for her. And like
Mhm.
the actresses pull that off at times where what is a campy movie and obviously they're having fun like dad would have bought us Uzis. There's this other point where you're like, yeah, I can like I guess I could relate to that if this was my situation. I was 13, 14 when I saw this movie in the theater, and I was there with a girl who I had dated. It was my second date film. And so, like, I was thinking about these things. Like, I was thinking about, like, what if the end of the world and I wasn't going to be able to see this woman next to me or this girl next to me? Like, so it was like, for a 13-year-old, it was real, right?
Right. Yeah. Gosh, 13. I never saw this in the theater. This is definitely this is a video store rental pre-Blockbuster. Like this is definitely that before even we were overtaken by the monolith that Blockbuster was to us. Um, and this leads to probably the ultimate sister moment, right? The girls just want to have fun. Let's hit the mall and shop, right? There's
Drop
no
the adrenaline.
rules. It's the end of the world. There's no rules. And they hit the mall and they do the classic, like, let's try on all the outfits, let's put on the hats, but let's keep our MAC 10s right here, just in case. We'll put them down for a moment, put on our nice long, up to our elbows gloves. And this is a classic trope of the 80s.
Yeah, and another thing about them that I do love about the sister duo is, you know, they're shopping. It's consumerism. They're in the mall, right? The kids who are going to go see these movies may see them in a mall. Like this
Right.
is like mall rat, right? Like I was saying, like I want to say, I want to say ground zero, right? That's my whole thing. Like, obviously, I was like, Breakfast Club was ground zero, or this is ground zero. Well, in fact, I realized there's a new ground zero. Fast Time at Ridgemont's High
That's yeah,
is
yeah.
ground zero,
That
right?
is the ground zero mall movie.
Yeah,
Absolutely. It is like probably the kind of king of the hill, Mount Rushmore, I am George Washington film of that is about mall culture in the 80s. Right.
absolutely. And
Yeah.
basically, like, starts the whole '80s, like, high school film, if you will, right? And
Right.
really, and like, themes like this one, having sex, right? Like, where are you going to kind of go and shop. Like, where are you going to do your socializing, right? It's all going to happen at the mall. So they say, let's go to the mall. And there's a kind of a goofy line later on where the scientists are looking for them. It's like, where would we go find two derelict teenagers? It's like, at the mall, right?
Right, right. I mean, well, we'll get to like the zombification of the world and how it's being dealt by the think tank. But I think we should talk a moment about Hector and his role as kind of our beautiful Eric Estrada man. That and this is my take on him is he's kind of the avatar of a normal caring family, right? And he has to go home to see where, is his mom gone? Like he we don't know where he was coming. Oh no, he describes he was out he was a truck driver and he was with a girl and he survived by being in the cab at the back of his truck
That's right.
with his girlfriend who got eaten soon after. Just kind of
Yeah.
Larry and his girlfriend both got eaten. So they're ready and available, both of them.
They're single.
Yeah. Recently single, ready to rumble. But it's in striking contrast when Hector going home versus like Reggie's looking for Sam and luckily finds Sam. Hector's looking for his family and doesn't find anyone. He finds a zombie kid, but he's really like you can see his home is got the Christmas tree and it's very homey. It's not this bright white empty space. It
Yeah.
feels cozy. There's tons of family photos everywhere, and that's what he cares about. He's like he wants to get the last bits of mementos of his life, and that's a stark contrast to the crate and barrel, house that Sam and Reggie live in, and he's also the next time when Reggie reappears, how does he reappear? Like it's like the failed effort to find his family, but he goes back to the radio station looking for Reggie and Sam, and how does he show up?
He shows up as Santa Claus and
With
with presents. Yes, and he's in a Santa suit, right? And he also has a 1953 insanely cool automobile. I don't know the exact
the
model.
Buick Roadmaster Skylark. Did you know there's a website for all cars in all movies?
Oh wow! I
Yep.
heard there was only 1,500 of this car because the
Yeah.
director picked this car out specifically. I forgot to get the total name, but like this is a beautiful car. Like
Right.
it is a gorgeous car.
But it's also an avatar of the greatest generation that he tries to
Yeah,
represent, right? It
totally.
was it was built in the 50s by the greatest generation, and at the very end of the film when he comes to when he and Sam come to save Reggie from the think tank, he's like decked out like a cowboy.
Yes.
He's got
Yeah.
his jeans and flannel shirt and literally a cowboy hat showing up in this Buick Roadster, right? So he's the he's the person who's like, this is the way family's supposed to be. This is how we want to remember things and what it's supposed to be like. And so in a funny way, that's to me how I read Hector as a character and his role to these girls who also become future family. It's really
Absolutely. Well,
awkward.
and to your point, as the girls are kind of atypical and badass, Hector is atypical, right? It's not like he's from the barrio and he's kind of trying to do this. Like, no, he's from his really good family down in San Diego, and like you said, like he has that whole same ambition as they do, and I think that's one of the things this film does good. It's so easy for some films to kind of just typecast everybody and move on. And this film, those characters are really characters, and you enjoy them, and they surprise you. And I think that's a really nice touch to Night of the Comet. It's one of the reasons why I think it is such a kind of cult classic, if you will.
Yeah, it is a surprise casting for Hector, and I think what's great is that ultimately this film is a zombie film, right? And it's a
Hmm,
commentary.
I don't. I argue that I believe that it's not much of a zombie film.
Well, okay, it has some of the trappings of a zombie film,
It
right? It's
does,
this
yes.
commentary on vanilla suburban consumer oriented society, right? Like it's you know Sam and Reggie's family is a broken one. You know, they have their superficial interests in shopping and fighting over boys. But in particular, my favorite scene about this comment is the shopping montage and how it's disrupted,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, exactly. By the pissed off stock boys.
The zombie punk stock boys.
Zombie punk. And that goes right back to Repo Man, because
Right,
remember, Emilio Estevez and the other guy, Chuck, were actually, stock boys in
right,
stocking all the Acme stuff. And actually, the two of the three actors, Dick Rude and I think it's Chris Peterson, um, were both. Chris Peterson was in Suburbia by Penelope Spheris in 1983. Dick Rude was in Repo Man. And the director said a lot of the cast, a lot of the crew was from the Repo Man. So they just took the crew from Repo Man.
right.
So,
Yeah,
like, there was a lot of influence of that kind of sense of punk. And seeing those two, I was like, wow, I can't believe, like, the punk stock boys.
right. And they were the marginalized workers that don't get to enjoy consumerism, right? But they're now in charge. And I love it. It's like, we're not crazy. We just don't give a fuck, right?
I
and
agree.
and also, the parody tropes of the 80s with they do the Russian roulette style dating game, right? If bachelor number one doesn't come out here, I'm going to ice bachelorette number two,
Right.
so it's there. That is where, and then ultimately I think this isn't zombie per se, but there is the skepticism about authority and government with the think tank, which we haven't even mentioned yet, and is kind of the hardest to track plot point of the whole movie, where there is the quote unquote smart people who were supposedly prepared, knew this was going to go wrong, and have their coverall army style outfits. And they fucked up, though. Somebody left the vents open,
That's
and
right.
so
That's
they're all
awesome.
they're all slowly turning into zombies. They're all and what are they doing to try to survive now? The true survivors are being brought in by pretending to save them, while in reality they're just trying to use them as blood bags. They're gassing them and hooking them up to IVs so that they can use their blood to try to develop serum
So,
to,
is it a
to
vampire
survive.
movie?
I don't know. But the idea is, like, it's also the, like, hey, the smart people aren't so smart. We can't trust the government. What do they really know?
Yeah.
And, which leads to, and I think this is kind of towards the end of this is like this idea of we need to reset society, right? This is to say society's so bad, and which is kind of a theme of many movies later. What's the with in the 90s, this anti-capitalist attitude and coming in
Like
films.
Fight Club.
Fight Club, thank
I
you.
mean, there's a lot. I mean, Dawn of the Dead, in many ways, does that. That's one of my favorite movies of all time. And they have the kid zombies and too, but it's also about the mall. It's also about consumerism, right? Like, so much of Night of the Comet, to me, kind of harkens back to that. But I think this idea of isolation and what does it all mean without that stuff, right,
Right,
is so interesting to me. Like, I think this film, what it does so well, apart from the criticism of consumerism and stuff, which I think has been done, I don't think it's
right,
like true super unique. But to your point you made earlier, the way in which it establishes those shots and it establishes this sense of a completely abandoned Los Angeles
right,
on basically a shoestring budget. Like, they said that they shot all of those shots in the middle of the day on the weekend because no one was in downtown LA in the 80s. So, like, they had 45 seconds before traffic would come through, but often it wouldn't. So, like, they could actually do that. But it was just excuse me, it was striking to me how they created this atmosphere of kind of, I don't know, like, abandonment. Like, what does this all lead to in some ways? Like, what is the end game is kind of like this complete, like, nothingness.
right. But it is a reset. Like, and there is a moment at the very end of the film where the red dust is
Yeah,
washed away, right? And
true.
you get a sense that because of the construct of the film, even the zombies are gone because you don't stay a zombie. Your blood just eventually dries up and you become dust. It was just a slower acting process. My favorite is like I love how this happened with the zombie stock boys where he's wearing sunglasses and the sunglasses like the early signs of you're slowly becoming a zombie is like you can't handle the light and so even the think tank leader is like he has to put the sunglasses on and so they're all dead. No, they're not dead. They're dust, literally. And the rain washes it all away. And we have a clear, bright new world. And we end with a nuclear family again.
Yeah, totally. It is great. Like you have not only the nuclear family with Reggie and Hector, as seemingly they're going to be mom and dad, but they picked up two kids who were going to be violently blood sucked by these two nurses who were great. It's like, you're going to go see Santa Claus. Everything's fine. And that's one of my favorite scenes
yeah,
because
yeah,
so
those two,
psychotic.
yeah, those two women are great.
Oh, they're great. They're like, we're gonna get that blood from these little fuckers, and it's like, oh my god. So anyway, it's got these two kids, one Asian American, one white kid, and the thing is you also have a nuclear family that starts to be a little bit diverse, right? And so like, there's that family, and
Oh,
there's
yeah,
that,
that's true.
and I one of my wishes of this film, and I wish it would have done it. And I'm rewatching it. I was like, it would have been brilliant if they would have had this is you have, they're on one side of the street and Sam, the younger sister's on the other side of the street, and she's still disappointed because
Right,
she doesn't have anyone, right? She's still alone.
right,
But the kid, there's someone, she's walking across the street, and the good suburban mom that Reggie's turning on to is, do not walk against the light, right? Don't
right,
cross against the light. And she's like, what are you talking about? You're out of your mind. And she goes, and then all of a sudden a car comes, jetting around the corner and almost hits her. And so obviously there is a sense that civilization's coming back. But in the car is a potential, love interest for Sam. So her whole outlook on the world changes. To your point, a reset. And I just wish to kind of keep with their consistency of a certain amount of like racial, like if that guy is just he's a white kid, right?
right,
But what if he were an African American?
right,
Like
right.
I think that would have been interesting because then you would have been starting kind of fresh across a whole different spectrum. And there's obviously many, many more. But just symbolically, that would have been super interesting. But obviously, this is
Well,
the 80s. That doesn't really happen that often.
I know, but they also I mean, where my mind goes with this nuclear family they've created, which is four individuals that have no relationship by blood to one another.
Uh,
They are all, and as you described in our notes, as like they're looking like they're ready to go to church as a family. They have their nice outfits and, they're talking in this language like, be careful as you go across the street. But what happens the next day, the next week? And, Bobby, in 10 years is looking pretty good. And Reggie's like, Hector's a little sad looking these days. And Hector's like looking at his daughter,
I
who's now
never
like
went there,
20.
actually. I never had that idea of
But
this
they
film,
have to
Michael.
repopulate the
What?
world, Jim. This
That's
is not so
weird.
simple.
I just want to say that.
No?
Is Sam going to look at Reggie at some point when she gets tired of DMK?
No, well, that's her actual sister. So
That's what I'm
no.
saying. Like, you still got to populate the world.
Exactly. They have to populate the world.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, a lot of this is tongue in cheek, but it does end with a nuclear family, which I think
Uh-huh.
really does shore up our argument that it is, very much a family film about these two young girls in um, post apocalyptic LA who are trying to keep things together. And it's funny because, watching this film, a couple of things came to mind, and I'll try not to take too much. The theater it starts at, El Rey, beautiful Art Deco theater on Wilshire Boulevard. I know this because for several years when I lived in Los Angeles, I lived on Cloverdale, which is right down the street. So I'd walk past this theater all the time. Now it's a theater for kind of like musical events and bands, but it looks like back in the day it was actually a movie theater. So cool. And I just love that that's where the video games are. And
Yeah.
I just kind of love this idea of watching LA in those spaces and seeing the kind of theater past, and kind of that has a real personal attachment to me as I see this film later. I didn't remember when I was living in LA in the 90s that this was in this film until after that. So there's always that. But anyway, this is also in a neighborhood, the El Rey Theater, called Miracle Mile. And Miracle Mile was called that because it was this famous place where they would sell cars in Los Angeles, but also it was where the La Brea tar pits were. It's where the Los Angeles County Museum of Art is, now the new Peterson kind of um, automobile museum. It's a really cool part of Los Angeles, not in the center, but close to the center. Anyway, there's a film from 1988 called Miracle Mile that has a very similar theme. These two kids fall in love, one night, and it's Anthony Edwards, and they go out. And so he's supposed to meet her, but he falls asleep because his alarm, something with a pigeon, and his alarm doesn't go off. I don't know. It's weird. But anyway, he goes to meet her. He's late, and he's at this place called Johnny's, which is a diner. And then he has a call on the outside, payphone, when those things existed, and he picks up the call, and someone's like, "Hey, you know what? Is this done? Yeah, not Dad. They're gonna put the payload. They're gonna make the big one, the wad. They're gonna blow it all over." It's like, listening to the movie, it's like, what is he talking about? But you get the idea that there's going to be a nuclear holocaust, and he's calling his dad to warn him. And the rest of the movie is about people, you know, getting the news, and it turns into a post-apocalyptic moment. And it's different, obviously, from Night of the Comet, but in some ways very similar. And I do love that movie, Miracle Mile, so much. But it's one of those movies where at the end, rather than them being a nuclear family and everything's great, they're all pushed into the tar pit and they go the way of the dinosaurs. So there's that real sense that, humanity doesn't make it. There is no reset. It's very bleak compared to Night
I
of the
mean,
Comet.
I'm just saying, though it ends on this nice nuclear family moment, I just think the road is coming. Right?
But
There will be more people to be met. There will be more survivors.
so
Life gets complicated.
I'll tell you my story. So this movie comes out in '88. I saw it like you on HBO. It was an HBO video, EMI
Okay.
Thorn HBO. I loved it. I have it right here. I can find it actually. Yeah, here it is. So here's the video, Miracle Mile. Love it, love it, love it. I also have a videotape of Night of the Comet. But anyway, I'm in Los Angeles, Long Beach, California. I went there right after my first year in college in Virginia. And I go out there because, no longer interested in school in Virginia. My dad's not going to pay for college anymore. So I go out to community college in Long Beach because it's like $35 a semester if you become a resident, which is like amazing. So I go there, I'm working. I meet this guy in a Ralph's. He's a bag packer, and he's like, "Hey, how you doing?" I used to run then. He ran. I'm like, "Oh, that's great. Let's go out for a run." So we go out for a run, and kind of making friends as I'm in this new context. He's like, "Hey, why don't you come over to my apartment? We'll watch a movie." He's like, "What movie are we watching?" He's like, "Miracle Mile." I'm like, "Awesome." Right? So go there, we watch Miracle Mile. Everything I talked about happens. Everybody tries to get a thing. The two lovers are in a helicopter. It crashes into the La Brea tar pits. That's the end, right? Everyone he had invited over to that little place turns to me and says, "Thank God I'm saved." I was like, "Oh, you're trying to bring me into your church group, you sons of bitches." So, like,
it's a cult.
It's a cult. But I love it that they used Miracle Mile to suggest that this is coming. This is the end of the world. They didn't use They didn't use
Night of the
Night of the
Comet.
Comet.
They should have used
Year
Night of the
Mind.
Comet.
Night of the Comet, I would have been like, what? Thank God, what? Anyway, thank you for entertaining me with that story.
Oh my gosh, Jim. Well, an unusual family, and we barely mentioned this is a holiday movie, and we're in the holiday season.
It
Yes, this is a Christmas movie.
We're doing it right.
Yeah, we're doing it right, and we have another holiday film, a very classic, coming next. So thank you, Jim Groom, on the Family Pictures podcast, and next time we'll be swinging some jingle bells, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Thanks, Michael. See you all later, everybody.
Bye-bye.